We do not believe the affirmative has answered the fundamental question of the resolution. The resolution asks if states should protect and promote cultural diversity, not if Blake and Martin have conducted a sufficient Marxist analysis of culture. Globalization is an irreversible process. The question is not if the world will grow more connected, but how states and societies will respond to this flattening of the world. Do we erect speed bumps on the road to progress, or provide a roadmap out of the present impasse? We believe there are two compelling disadvantages to the affirmative's positions about state-sanctioned cultural diversity and the UNESCO Convention. First is our arguments about minority culture. Second, our arguments about trade liberalization and sustainable development. On to our first point about minority cultures. The affirmative's examples of the Olympics and artwork demonstrate our argument about the dangers of state-sanctioned cultural diversity. The symbols and values displayed at Sochi represent only the Russia deemed appropriate by President Putin, bureaucrats, and oligarchs in Moscow. The art on display at Sochi is a cartoonish bear, not the queer punk art of Pussy Riot, not the art of Muslims in the Caucasus, not the street art of dissidents in Kiev. The question is not how we personally value art, but how will those in power, how will states use culture to police the boundaries of citizenship and nationhood? Ask yourself, what part of the affirmative argument answers these claims made by Dr. Robert Albro, Professor J.P. Singh, and Danny in his first speech? The affirmative has a compelling criticism of capitalist commodification of culture, but no defense of state-sanctioned culture as the alternative. If you decide both states and markets devalue culture, you should vote negative. The affirmative's repeated assertion that states will be multicultural and markets are worse are not substantiated by any evidence or examples in this debate. In fact, according to our authors, these measures promote monoculturalism, as explained by Professor James Rausch. Protection of domestic cultural goods production, actually practiced by many of the world's smaller countries, may do little to preserve cultural diversity, because it primarily stimulates production of cultural goods that imitate those of larger countries in order to share in their consumption network externalities. We also believe, independent from the production and valuing of culture, that these measures are counterproductive and dangerous, as explained by Professor J.P. Singh. Cultural diversity viewed from the perspective of the nation-state is problematic. Politically, of course, nation-states make this claim themselves in protecting their self-interest globally. Cultural diversity, measured territorially within the confines of the nation-state, then becomes a political label that masks the interactive and hybrid features of culture. The problem with the UNESCO Convention is that it understands culture between nation-states, but not inside. What about subcultures and minority communities that are historically marginalized by those in power? The affirmative would let those in power determine what is culturally valuable. The question is not whether markets or the state better protect minority culture, but how those in power will manipulate these tools in order to suppress and determine what is valuable. Second, our arguments about free trade. A framing issue here, we agree with the affirmative that culture is important, and we should be careful to recognize and resist overly commodified and commercialized artistic expressions. But I strongly disagree that culture alone is life. Life is material. If the consequence of their abstract theorizing about culture is to impede global free trade, people will die. Globalization has the power to materially improve people's lives. What value is culture if you are starving, homeless, and unemployed? If we demonstrate that the UNESCO Convention represents a roadblock to trade liberalization and therefore human development, that is a compelling reason to vote negative. As explained by Michael Spence, Nobel Prize winner and faculty member of New York University Stern School of Business. This is about sustained growth, its causes, consequences, and internal dynamics. One might call it a report on economic miracles, except that we believe this term is a misnomer. Unlike miracles, sustained, high growth can be explained and we hope repeated. Growth is not an end in itself, but it makes possible to achieve other important objectives of individuals and societies. It can spare people en masse from poverty and drudgery, Nothing else ever has. Growth is a necessary, if not sufficient, condition for broader development, enlarging the scope for individuals to be productive and creative. The crux of our argument is that there is no way to get outside the capitalist economy that exists in the status quo. Even if you find the affirmative's criticism of the way that capitalism values culture now compelling, you should still vote negative, because the material consequences of states implementing policies based off of this logic is to impede globalization, to put up roadblocks to sustainable development, to tell people that it is fine that they are living in material poverty as long as they have culture. I think it's also important to view both of these arguments contextually. If you think that markets are bad at protecting culture, you should ask yourself if states are any better. Our arguments about state-sanctioned culture being bad for minority cultures and impeding trade liberalization are co-constitutive of each other. You should ask yourself if the Sochi Olympics are a good example of multiculturalism. $52 billion were spent by the Russian Federation to put on an event that celebrates only particular parts of Russian identity and does nothing to advance the material reality of the Russian people. We believe that all of the examples provided in this debate substantiate a negative ballot. The question is state-sanctioned cultural diversity valuable? We believe that the affirmative has many compelling reasons why we personally should be skeptical of commodified culture, but zero justification of what states will and have done with these arguments.